From the last election to the one coming before us. There's less than 60 days before the midterms, and with that date, the election chief at the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency is warning about threats to election officials and poll workers. Kim Wyman spoke with our Nicole Sganga in her first television interview since taking on the new role.
We are facing a workforce problem. As these stories of the threats and intimidation are shared, people who would normally be poll workers on Election Day or work at a voting center or maybe work at a ballot processing center are taking that step back and saying, I don't know that it's worth my life or it's worth my personal safety. So I know that I'm hearing from my colleagues across the country that they are having trouble getting people to work the polls and work on Election Day. I think that the level of threats that we're seeing, they vary widely, and I think it has a lot to do with how high profile the election official was in the lead up to the election, and then also obviously based on the outcome in many states, because the commonality seems to be states where Trump did not prevail. So the threats that they are receiving are intimidation. They are some of the threats are real. You know, we're going to hang you. I hope somebody puts a bullet in your head. That kind of thing. So it's unnerving. It's unnerving.
Let's bring in CBS News Homeland Security and Justice reporter Nicole Sganga. So, Nicole, that response was just moving along and then clearly got very emotional. What more can you tell us about the threats to election security workers and the resources that are needed to combat those threats?
John, for so many election officials, this is personal, and Kim Wyman went on to say that as many as 1 in 3 election officials have left their posts ahead of midterms. She's worried about the institutional knowledge walking out the door with them. Election officials in Colorado and Georgia tell CBS News their offices are now fortified with bulletproof glass. I spoke with Arizona, California, and Pennsylvania officials today who told me their tabulation centers have been surrounded by security fences and cameras facing inside and out. Some of those cameras now live stream video to invite spectators into the process. The Brennan Center for Justice, which is a nonpartisan group, estimates approximately $300 million is needed to physically secure election offices and workers for the next 5 years. CISA now has more than 150 physical security specialists nationwide who can help assess risk at election offices and polling sites. But election officials tell us they need money to be able to put CISA's recommendations in place. Justice Department officials who have come before Congress have pointed to their assistance grant program, but a DOJ spokesperson told CBS News that as of the last reporting period, June 30th, DOJ had not granted any of those funds for election security. One more thing, John, over half of the 8,800 voting municipalities in this country are considered to be small or medium in size. Those are the districts getting hit the hardest. Those are the county clerk's offices without the resources to apply for some of these federal grants, let alone put the necessary security measures in place. Those communities without law enforcement officers needed to meet that need come Election Day, and many of those small or medium municipalities are also the reddest, filled with a majority who voted for former President Trump in 2020 and believe in what's become known as the big lie. Where resources are the scarcest, election officials tell me oftentimes the misinformation environment is the ripest.
It's worth noting for people and reminding us all that CISA existed in the first place to deal with external threats, to threats from overseas, and we've just spent these last several minutes talking about threats from within our own country. But I want to return to the question of overseas threats. Russian and Iranian hackers have targeted U.S. elections in 2016, in 2020. What have you learned about the efforts to deal with that and confront those threats, which are still ongoing despite now the Homeland threats?
John, it's a great point, and those efforts to hack into our election systems have not stopped. Now, Wyman told me there are currently no specific nor credible threats to the United States election system, but officials should be prepared for a range of attacks ahead of midterms. Coordinated efforts by foreign adversaries, you mentioned a few of them, designed to both intimidate voters and incite social unrest, as well as access voter registration databases, continue. Take a listen.
We approach it as it's a constant threat. There are actors, either cyber criminals or foreign adversaries, who are trying to get into election systems every minute of every day. They haven't let up from 2016, and we don't anticipate they will anytime soon.
John, in addition to threats by foreign adversaries, election officials have renewed concerns about what they're calling insider threats, those posed by individuals within election administration offices here in the U.S. Unofficial election audits spanning several states. Earlier this year, Colorado's Mesa County clerk was indicted for facilitating a security breach of her county's election system. Now, Wyman says the biggest challenge for election officials is fighting the information war. But here's a bright spot. She says she absolutely wants people to see the level of precision and professionalism of election workers up close. And election officials tell me they saw real promise in their efforts to give skeptics a first-row seat to this year's primaries. As Matt Crane, the head of the Colorado County Clerks Association, put it to me today, the solution is to learn the truth from the experts, not the lies from the grifters.
And to believe that truth when you hear it. Nicole Sganga in Washington. We'll be talking a lot in 60 days. Thanks.
Thank you.